What if we could capture it continuously and predict things like, chronic kidney disease, the need for dialysis, or a rise of sodium in the blood for hypertension patients? All of those things would be incredibly useful. So today we track electrolyte levels, blood level markers completely non-invasively and continuously. Can we name a company that is a deep tech company that has no marketing, media, and distribution? And I couldn't find one. Even like OpenAI, that's this deep tech lab, they're a massive media engine. Their launch videos can generate so much excitement. We want to build a generational company that saves a million lives.
Welcome back to the show. Today we have an action-packed story for you guys. Today we have Mitchell, a young but a mighty entrepreneur who has a knack for finding opportunities, who went from doing just sneaker arbitrages in high school to now building a deep tech health company.
Mitchell's journey is really fascinating because he was the son of second generation Soviet immigrants who wanted him to become a surgeon. But Mitchell wasn't a big fan of that. Instead, he chose to build a business in the healthcare space with a goal to save a million lives.
It's an AI native operating system. A lot of you guys watching might have heard or seen those continuous glucose monitors, mainly for diabetes patients. It uses a very similar technology with ECG monitors, but to track all the other types of nutrients like potassium, sodium in your blood. Currently, it's mainly used for athletes, but it can easily expand to other sectors, chronic illness, and beyond.
In this episode, we dive into the core of his business and we get into why content matters in a deep tech company, something I thought was very fascinating. And then we go even deeper as Mitchell explains how his podcast is helping him network, build authority, and educate a highly technical audience.
We also get the details on how he's iterating his product, moving from a friction filled smartwatch interface to an existing ECG hardware. So, whether you're interested in health tech, how to build deep tech companies, or just the power of content itself, this episode is a must.
So, Mitchell, let's start off the podcast by talking about your story. How did you get to where you are right now?
Yeah, the story's a fun one. So what did I do? I'm quite young now, so I can't say the life has been too long, but it's been action packed so far, and hopefully it only continues. It all kind of starts off with I'm son of immigrants. My parents immigrated from the Soviet Union. I think it was 1999, 2000, around that time. And so I always like to bring this up, and I realize that when I say the story, it actually kind of sets a pretty egoistic undertone, but I'll still say it. There's this three generation theory that I always constantly bring up to people anecdotally when we speak, is that first generation comes to a new place, learns, has to work really hard to survive and thrive and build out their community. Second generation inherits the hard work, plus knows the name of the game and does really well. We'll ignore the third generation. They don't do very well, and I have a kid right now, so we'll see how that plays out. But I am in that second generation, son of immigrants, so raised kind of with that Soviet and immigrant mentality, plus kind of born and raised here, so know a little bit of the name of the game. Early on, childhood was really full of playing soccer, probably the heaviest thing in my life. Was pretty advanced in school, doing all the things, high achiever, doing pretty well, but like I can't say I was exceptional, skipping 7 grades and 8 grades. Like I was doing a few years ahead in most of the STEM topics, and then at some point ended up dropping off a little bit and doing just like a few years ahead. But really was probably soccer was kind of my outlet for a lot of things. Ended up playing pro for some time, very brief, in France for about half a year, which kind of all that soccer playing led up to that. Played in the U.S. system at the top tier here for a little bit. Um, and throughout that time, constantly, I think actually there was this one story that my mom said that really drove me. She brought up this example of a kid in the local area that worked at Dunkin' Donuts. So he had an employee discount, and he would then get orders from his entire high school or middle school, wherever he was. I think high school it was at the time, and he would take the arbitrage and the fact that he would charge you the typical store prices, maybe plus some, because he was delivering it to you and bringing it to school, because every morning he had morning shifts, but he would take the arbitrage. And so I was like, wow, first off, the way my parents are talking about this kid, like he's super resourceful and capable and cool. And so that's my first business. Starting at around 12 years old, I started a really small business. The first few businesses when you're super young, you call them businesses, but obviously they're not really businesses. When I was 12 years old, my name was getting well known around the community as a good soccer player. I started getting higher and higher before I went pro. And I ran a soccer camp for a few kids, made like $1,000 in 2 days, and thought it was the coolest thing. And so a few years later, I ended up starting my first company, which was a Leshchiner Souls, which was a marketplace for high-end apparel arbitrage. So think like StockX or Goats, but instead focused on really in-person and in real life transactions. And really kind of I was the supply side for a while, where I was buying the shoes, and then at some point I kind of took off and was the marketplace arbitrage or aggregating buyers and sellers so that they could create transactions and take a fee on top of. Ended up bootstrapping that business to a good bit in revenue, brought a lot of success really early on. So-called sold the business, sold some of the parts of the business. Um, and yeah, that was kind of my first foray into entrepreneurship, and that was all happening while playing soccer. When both those things cut out, and soccer, I didn't get re-signed. I realized I'm not going to play in the first league, and the other business I had sold parts of it and made some good money, and started investing that capital. I realized that entrepreneurship and really changing an industry, solving big problems was something that was by far the most exciting to me. That was in the back of my mind, and that was right around the time I went to college. And in college, like maybe a week before I started, or a few weeks before I started, I thought I was going to be a doctor or be a surgeon, specifically like Soviet parents. It's the common trajectory. And then I kind of did this logical deduction to say, okay, well, why do I want to be a surgeon? Part of it is just that I was indoctrinated from a young age to think it's the coolest career. But why do we think it's the coolest career in that community? Well, one, you make good money. But like in relativity, you don't make that. There's a lot of career paths I could have taken that are making much, much more money. I had the offers to do them out of college, or even in college to go be, whether it's a quant or whether it's big tech software or something like that. You make a lot more money than a doctor can. The second thing was that, well, it's good for the world, right? You're a doctor, you're saving lives. But then I had this logical deduction to say, look, if I'm a surgeon, how many lives do I save in my career, my 40-year career? Not 40, sorry, 28-year career, right? Because I spent so much time in school. Well, maybe 10, 20, 30, 40,000, right? That's the upper limit. I don't remember the exact number I came to. That's very back of the napkin math. But what if I build a company that unlocks a new technology that saves a million lives, takes a quarter of the time, makes 10 times the money? And sure, risk adjusted, everyone's going to say, your logic sounds good until you factor in risk, right? It's a lot much easier to be a doctor than it is to build a generational company, much. And risk adjusted, I don't know what the answer is. And so, but that logical deduction let me say, look, I'm a gunslinger. I like to take big shots, I like to take big risk. And at the end of at the worst case, look, I've ran through life. I've finished high school year early, finished college year early. Why not take the shot and then see how that all plays out? So that was kind of my foray into entrepreneurship again for this time that's happening now. And across, I guess I missed a few key details. I mean, throughout my time, I spent some time as always in the health tech side. So I was an engineer at Palantir. I did investment banking at Wells Fargo. Like, dabbled in all the health tech side of things and the business side and the engineering side and the application layer, like as much as I can without actually working at the hospital. Um, but yeah, that all kind of culminated into what we're building today, which is ElectroCare. And ElectroCare is an AI native operating system for health and performance, which is a lot of buzzwords. But what we actually mean when we say that is we use existing sensors, typically continuous ECG based heart rate monitors, and we provide a suite of products on top of it, which are many various different continuous blood biomarkers. So today we track electrolyte levels, potassium, sodium, calcium, magnesium, blood level markers completely non-invasively and continuously. And so it's useful for athletes to quantify and predict cramps and headaches and fatigue and optimize performance. And then in the future, it's useful for chronic kidney disease patients to quantify potassium to not die, for sodium patients or for hypertension patients to quantify sodium to avoid cardiac arrest and all these other things. So really massive use case here. And we get new use cases every week, whether it's pregnant women or firefighters or astronauts or hungover college kids. There's always something, a new use case for what we're building. But it all kind of led into this, bigger company where we have a much, much more ambitious goal. The goal here is very much, I could care less about my own book and making money here. We want to build a generational company that saves, a million lives. That's kind of our North Star metric. Is we don't like the unicorn status and whatever. It's cool and all, but for us, is how do we save a million lives? And there's a few tranches we have to get through to get there.
Oh, got it. So you took the arbitrage from Dunkin' Donuts example and applied it to high-end apparel like StockX or GOAT. Now, in terms of the platform, did you actually code the whole backend yourself, or how did you tackle the technical side of the business?
No, so funny enough, the quick story on this is I asked around. I mean, look, I was young at the time. I started this when I was 14, and I asked, "Hey, who's the smartest engineer that you guys know?" And everyone pointed me to this one guy. And this one guy, we talked for a while, at the end of the day, he asked for equity, and I was like, "I'll give you 10K. No, I'll give you 15K. I'll give you 20K." He's like, "No, no, I want equity." And this long story short, he said no because he wanted equity, and I said no. So I found someone else. I found a different engineer. But the funny part of the story is that that guy is today my co-founder for our venture-backed company, ElectroCare. So this time I said, "Hey, let's start a company with a much bigger vision." He said, "I know how last one turned out, so I won't say no this time." But the previous one, yeah, just found an engineer, a local engineer, to build it. It's not very difficult, and a lot of what we were doing focused on marketplaces and like WhatsApp and text groups linking people together to create transactions.
Okay, that's incredible. So the engineer who first said no is now your co-founder. Let's talk about ElectroCare now, though. It looks like you have a waitlist set up, and I'm always interested in marketing. So how did you guys get to the point to set up that waitlist?
It's actually a bit bigger than that now, but I know this for the sake of you recording and editing this podcast. It's not. I'm not going to give you the best answer. We're very bad at marketing. So far, right? This is a work in progress, and we're going all in on content, and we're spending a lot of time. And I think if we have this conversation again in 6 months, I'll come to you and say I think we figured it out. But the way to get it, I mean, we do podcasts. A few really big names in health and wellness that carry a lot of weight. Um, right, like UGC is all the rage, and I think UGC is getting a bit saturated, and people are a little bit sick and tired of their favorite and most look up to person shoving products down their face. But um, you know, that was the biggest way for us. That's the only way we naturally got people. And there was like referral funnels we tried to build, and none of that was super successful. So the main successful thing was we had a few big podcasters give us a shout out, and they threw it around in all their internal channels, and that blew it up. Other than that, a lot of the teams and orgs that we talked to and we're going to work with or do work with, we had all of the players sign up. So a lot of those people are part of existing orgs. And so that's like a big, if you sign like a residency academy that has 500 players, you sign a team that has 200 players, 150 players, right? They all sign up, and that's kind of a nice way. But outside of those two methods, we really didn't do anything unique or novel. And that's why we had a really massive growth. And since then on the wait list, it's very much plummeted.
Okay, so it sounds like you were able to generate a lot of traction by going on podcasts. So I wanted to ask, were you a guest on these podcasts, or did you go up to these podcasts and pay them a fee for an advertisement? And did that advertisement get you the traction?
Ad read, well, partially ad read, but also partially just those people internally blasting their channels, right? Like they've got all these WhatsApp groups and Slack channels and said like, "Hey guys, new product coming out solves this cool problem. Send it around in all your channels," and it created like a bunch of communities seeding this content. So it was very much through that. Um, but yeah, like I was not able to get on those shows, and I don't think anytime soon I'll be able to jump onto Huberman or Peter Attia and chat about these things. I think maybe there's a chance, right? I think I have a lot of really interesting takes on wearables and um, going on really into the science of wearables and some of that kind of health component. But no, we were not on the shows. We're doing a roadshow now. I think when you reached out, that's why we're excited to do this because we've got maybe 5-10 shows that are coming out with me as a guest in the next month or so. But yeah.
That's a great point. So even deep tech companies can't survive without media and distribution. Given the core thesis and recognizing that education is going to be a need in your space is what led you to create content. So has running your own podcast, shooting videos, creating content in this way helped the company?
I think at the core, we've kind of had this core thesis around content marketing, media, and distribution, and just the clear emphasis that these points have and how important they are and fundamental to building a business, no matter what kind of business. And I said maybe a week or two where I was just going crazy over this, and I was looking into absolutely everything I could regarding like, hey, can we name a company that is a deep tech company that has no marketing, media, and distribution? Because I was going to say, look, let's be a very technical company. Let's kill. So it's a very clinical and just killer product, and then like let's win that way. And I couldn't find one. Even like OpenAI, that's this deep tech lab. They're a massive media engine. Their launch videos could generate so much excitement. Sam Altman has a massive presence, right? And so when there's a new product launch, he'll tweet about it, and that generates massive impressions. And so even this like super deep tech product that's very sophisticated on the tech side, it still has that. All these like computational genomics companies and computational biology companies, you'd be lying if you said Google DeepMind didn't have a big presence in the media. Google DeepMind is a highly technical company. And so I was like, look, if that's the case, like we're no better, we have no out. And so for sure, you'll see us in the next 6 months, right? We've got the podcast that's grown quite well, and we've got a lot of ideas. I think one really big part of this space that's has issues and it's diluted is that as consumers in the consumer space, you often view larger companies as the source of authority and truth. And there's really no way to break that because that's just kind of how hierarchical and psychology works. But it's often problematic because when Whoop and Aura are your source of truth, of course their source of truth is going to tell you to buy their product. Now look, I'm going to play my own book here too. I'm not going to like act as if I'm holier than thou. I will also give you the science. But the core is like we have a core belief that we started this from a scientific perspective. How do we really create a scientifically strong product? But now we constantly face the people saying, like, look, why or why do I need this? But then it's just because it's a lack of education. The second you realize the science and where it is and what's flawed with the current market and what we've changed about it, you're buying this. But so there's a big component for us is like, how do we educate even the brightest of the bright? I've had a lot of conversations with pro sports teams where they hire the coolest athletic directors and the directors of performance, and they've have very very little science backing a lot of their stuff that have to do with our space, right? They come from institutes and they all got their PhDs, but their core research is logically flawed. Not even like a intricacy, but if you really sit down and you like explain to them, they're like, wait, what I learned for the past 6 years make no sense? And they come to this conclusion on our 30-minute calls. And it makes me realize like so much of this is education. And how do you inform people? Well, it's content. There's no other way to inform people in education. It's content, it's blogs, it's reels, it's whatever else. So we're very much going all in on that. I think we tried like the small reel thing campaign didn't do too well, and we'll kind of restart that and do a much smarter one now that we've kind of sat down and thought about it. But yeah, we've got a few media arms that are going to really start getting active in the next months.
Well, it sounds like the podcast has been a fantastic way to network. Getting target customers, really just people that you normally not have access to, have an incentive to actually talk to you. But has this approach actually helped you close any deals or partnerships? Like, have you ever interviewed somebody without any plan to have business, but then later on ended up pitching them?
Yeah, I mean, so like, look, starting a podcast had a lot of ups in it, and it was like, look, so on your last point, getting a hold of high caliber people in this space is difficult, right? There's so many startups nowadays, and not there wasn't before, but there's just a lot, right? So getting a hold of someone and saying like, "Hey, I just want to pick your brain," or "I have a question about this," there's no incentive for them, right? Unless you were introed by someone high caliber, or again, there's like some warm there, or like you're very high growth and they want to hop on the train and they want to invest, or they're an investor, or they want to be an advisor, or like some incentive. They have no incentive. When you build a platform that lets them kind of get exposure to their products, you incentivize them to say, "Hey, I actually want to be on your podcast because I want people from my company to know and to talk about my story or talk about this topic." And then I get out of it is like, "Hey, we talked for half an hour before the conversation or half an hour after. We get to know each other. We are now friends. I provided value to you first, so that when I go to do something, there's a good chance I can come in and call in that favor." So, um, yeah, it's been a really, really great way to build a network. People are really open to hopping on podcasts. We've seen podcasts that are much, much smaller than us get much bigger name guests. And I think as we've gone to the side, I mean, there are a few very ambitious guests. Like I'd love to have the Hubermans and the Peter Attias, maybe even the RFK Juniors of the world to hop on the podcast and talk about health and have really cool topics. And I think it's definitely something feasible for us in the next 6 months to grow this thing into a platform that can get those people. Um, but yeah, it's been super useful. And on terms of like the other components of it, one big part of it is like, hey, I'm new to this space, and as much as like research as I've done, again, people like hierarchy and like a sort of sense of validation. The more subscribers I have, the more trust there is in who I am. I think it's a horrible way to live life, but unfortunately, that's the reality of how the media landscape and information network landscape works today. And so when I talk about health and you see all these topics, testosterone founds, unsaturated fat, sodium, saunas, genetics, food as medicine, all of these topics, when I'm discussing them with prominent people, as well as my own research and synthesis on subset of papers, it gives a lot of validity to the things that I say. So when I say, hey, we have a really cool product coming here that's really science backed, it really gives some validity there. All those, and the last one is probably, yeah, the top line growth is to say, hey, Mitchell Leshchiner, Silicon Fox podcast. Okay, cool. What does Mitchell Leshchiner do? ElectroCare, some waitlist signups, some interest there. And so just overall, it's been a really great growth engine to kind of create validity and just bring information there. And I think on the bite-sized ones, so like the biomarker breakdowns that you see there, the health habits, we don't see too many episodes on that. I think Peter Tia and like again, like Mark Hyman and the big names of the world, they started doing this. But how can you disseminate information and say, let's take 5 or 6 papers and a lot of common knowledge and let's put it into like a 10-minute episode so that if you listen to for like 6, 7, 8, 9 minutes, you get to know almost everything the world really knows today that's actually well studied on saunas. You don't need to read another new article coming out. You don't need to constantly synthesize information. We put it to you like a bite-sized format that you could do like on a, you can run a, in the time you listen to our episode, you can run a mile and you'll realize like everything about this biomarker. And I think it's really useful. Some people say it's too technical. Some people say it's not technical enough. So of course we have some room to figure that out. But yeah, episodes have gotten interesting. The paper that you just mentioned before the episode, testosterone founders, is like, that Cyphox did the study at Y Combinator with over 100 people, and they age normalized it so that there was no like data wasn't too skewed, and it was like, hey, what are the testosterone levels of a pre-seed, seed, Series A, Series B, and late stage founders? And of course, again, like there's not enough numbers in the Series B and late stage to really get that quality data, but there were really interesting correlations. And so bringing that kind of information out, maybe as a founder, will make you realize like, hey, I need to make sure my testosterone is really high, which means I need to sleep well, work out, eat healthy, and that's actually going to correlate to my success. Because there's clear data on this. So yeah, it's brought a lot of really interesting things.
For example, have you ever interviewed a head of an institute with a plan to later on pitch them?
Not yet. Um, not yet. So we'll see. I think a lot of these partnerships with the guests that you see on the screen now is like that's something we could talk about in the future. But with where we're at today, there's not much that there's not many ways we can partner. But it's absolutely something we think about. It's like, hey, how do you because at the end of the day, partnerships are relationships, and if we could create relationships via the podcast, whatever else, then going into a partnership meeting, there's obviously that established connection. So that's something we think about a lot today, but I'm sure that's something that can be the case if that's what we wanted it to be.
Okay, that makes sense, right? You want to build the relationship first, and then maybe in the future you can always pitch them. But for now, I want to get back to ElectroCare, and I want to talk about these iteration loops that you spoke about earlier. What did the first version of this product look like, and how is it different from the product right now? And also, how will the product look in maybe a year and a half from now?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when we first started, it was all about the back end models. It was say, hey, how do we build machine learning models to quantify blood level electrolytes from electrocardiogram? And for a while, it was just like, let's work with the existing data set. Then we realized the data set's flawed, so we had to build our own. And then the first product was like a smartwatch interface. So you have to stop and take an ECG because all the smartwatches that have ECGs, like the Whoops and the Apples and Samsung and Garmin's, they're not continuous. You have to stop and take the reading. And so it was like this very frictionful process that we didn't know for 4 months, 5 months that it was so frictionful and bad, and we thought people were going to use it, but they weren't. And so a massive iteration across all of those platforms. And the form factor that we've gotten to is like, look, it needs to be continuous ECG because we need to give you preventative health metrics and say like, hey, you're about to cramp, you're about to have a headache. Here's how to optimize your performance. Like we really need to be preventative in that sense. And then the second thing was like we don't want to build hardware yet today. We want to tap into existing hardware components. People are sick and tired of more and more hardware, and they already have so many wearables being sold to them. Why can't we do much deeper AI analysis on the existing wearables? And so that came with like, hey, let's use the existing chest wraps, like the Polars, the Garmin's, and so forth, and let's provide this data so that it's useful to people that already have the straps and just need to buy the software. Or again, if you don't have the strap, we'll arbitrage you the strap, and you'll be able to buy it from us. But yeah, that's kind of the form factor it's came to today. And a lot of it, again, is just, yeah, user feedback and how people use it and how often people use it and how do they act upon it. One big interesting thing for us to see is like, are people actually acting upon the advice that we say? Because we try to make it as actionable as possible, right? You have all this health data nowadays, but so much of it is so not actionable. So how do we make it super actionable? But yeah, all those things kind of led up to where we're at today. 6 months from today, I think is a great question. I think 6 months is a bit ambitious to start thinking about hardware. I think we continue to tap into existing hardwares and we license out deals, and there's a lot of continuous ECGs in both clinical and non-clinical settings. But I think at some point we definitely start exploring an idea like, hey, what if you could have, a so-called AI native doctor, which is just like a little patch that's adhesive, and it's just you've got a patch stuck onto you, and that thing takes an ECG, has an accelerometer, has all these things, and we can quantify a lot of blood biomarkers fully non-invasively and continuously, and predict all the things about your health. Because all of these AI doctors are coming out, that collect your blood labs once every 6 months, and then maybe collect some of your wearable data. But the wearable data is pretty flawed, and the blood lab once every 6 months is not very often. It's a lot more often than it used to be. But what if we could capture it continuously and predict things like, yeah, chronic kidney disease, or the need for dialysis, or hyperkalemia, or just a rise of sodium in the blood for hypertension patients? All of those things would be incredibly useful.
Okay, so I understand the friction point between stop and go ECG, and now you said you moved to continuous ECG hardware. But I'm a health enthusiast, right? And so I don't have that kind of equipment, and that's what my question is about. Is your goal to target athletes for now, or are you also looking at hobbyists like me?
Yeah, athletes, not medical patients. Yes, there's a lot of regulation that comes with that. I would just say high performers. So like, I used to play professional soccer. I now run. I'm going to be doing my first official high rocks sometime soon, and I do all like the fitness events. And like people that are doing Ironmans and marathons and high rocks and all that kind of stuff, they typically wear chest straps, or if they don't, they'll wear wristwatches. But they know the flaws that come with those wristwatches, and they're not very accurate. So they're often waiting and excited to get the chest straps. So all those kind of people, which like there's like 2-3 million of them alone in the U.S. that are really elite performers. If you go a little bit less elite, like myself, there's another 5-6 million of them, and so it's a pretty big market in the US alone. Obviously, Europe has a big presence as well, and a bunch of other countries and continents. Um, but yeah, typically more competitive people. Your average person's not going to wear a chest strap. It's not very comfortable. It's just not worth it.